The rain-slicked streets of New Carthage glistened under a pallid streetlight as Vincent "Vinny" Marconi stepped off the bus, his heavy boots echoing on the wet pavement. Once a decorated soldier, now a man burdened with secrets, he carried the weight of memories from a past that refused to let him go. His eyes, weary yet determined, surveyed the cityscape that concealed both his escape and his impending peril. Before we get into the story, comment below where in the world you are watching from today, and if you like this story, don't forget to subscribe. Unbeknownst to him, in the dim backroom of a derelict warehouse across town, mob boss Angelo, the Falcon, Ferraro, had just sealed his decision, one that would plunge Vinny into a labyrinth of treachery and bloodshed. For years, Angelo Ferraro ruled New Carthage with an iron fist and a cunning smile. His empire, built on illicit deals and unspeakable crimes, had grown to strangle the city in fear and corruption. And now, a whisper had reached his ears. An ex-soldier with the tactical skills and relentless resolve to unearth his darkest secrets. In a world where loyalty was bought and sold, Vinny was seen as a loose end, an unpredictable element that could unravel Ferraro's carefully woven web of power. The Falcon's solution was as brutal as it was definitive. Dispatch his most skilled hitmen to silence the man who had once served his country, but now threatened his criminal reign. Vinny had no inkling of the shadow that trailed him. His days of military precision had given way to a life of quiet anonymity, filled with small acts of defiance against an oppressive society that no longer valued his service. He rented a modest room in a nondescript boarding house, spending his nights poring over old case files and memories of missions long past. Every creak of the building and distant murmur of footsteps was a reminder that even in anonymity, danger lurked. His military instincts were finely tuned, and yet the personal cost of vigilance weighed heavily on him. Across the city, Angelo Ferraro sat in his opulent office, a sanctuary of polished mahogany and heavy drapes that muffled the chaos of the urban sprawl. His eyes, cold and calculating, scanned a series of reports spread out before him. Each document detailed the shifting alliances, betrayals, and whispers of dissent within his ranks. The mention of a former soldier stirring trouble had struck a nerve. Ferraro's reputation was built on absolute control, and a man with Vinny's skill set could inspire a rebellion if left unchecked. With a swift motion, he tapped a scarred name into his secure phone, a man known only as Rocco, whose loyalty was as unquestionable as his penchant for violence. Rocco's voice, a gravelly murmur laden with menace, confirmed the assignment. "We'll handle him, boss. Consider it done." The simplicity of the promise belied the brutal efficiency that had made Rocco a feared figure in the underworld. In the days that followed, a network of informants and street-level thugs was activated, their mission clear: track Vinny's every move. The hunt was on, and the mob's shadow loomed ever closer. Vinny's transition from soldier to civilian had been marred by constant vigilance. Every routine, every cautious step, was now a calculated measure against an enemy he had yet to see. He frequented a small diner on the fringes of town, a place where he could blend into the crowd and observe without attracting attention. It was in this unremarkable establishment that he first noticed a peculiar pattern. The same man, wearing a nondescript cap and a coat pulled tight against the chill, had been watching him from a distant corner. Though the man's face was partially obscured by the shadow of his hat, Vinny's instincts flared. The subtle dance of suspicion had begun, and the former soldier's past life whispered warnings of an imminent confrontation. Unbeknownst to Vinny, his every move was being chronicled. The hitmen dispatched by Ferraro were not amateurs. They were men who had honed their craft in the darkest alleys of power, their souls long since traded for loyalty to a corrupt empire. Their preparations were meticulous, their strategies layered in deception. Rocco's orders were clear: eliminate Vinny before he could gather any allies or reveal information that might threaten the mob's iron grip on the city. Each hitman was a ghost, moving unseen in a city that itself was a labyrinth of shadows and secrets. As Vinny left the diner one rain-soaked evening, a chill wind tugged at his coat. The city felt unusually silent, as if holding its breath in anticipation. His thoughts, heavy with the burdens of his past, turned to the family he had once hoped to build, a life that now seemed as distant as the battles he had fought abroad. In that moment of introspection, the sound of a car engine broke the quiet, followed by the unmistakable click of a gun being cocked. Reflexively, Vinny ducked into a narrow alley, his heart pounding with the sudden surge of adrenaline that his military training had ingrained in him. Behind the facade of routine existence, a deadly game had been set in motion. Vinny, though outnumbered and unprepared for the full might of organized crime, was not without his own arsenal of survival skills. Every sense was heightened, every shadow a potential threat. The alley became a crucible of tension, a place where time slowed and every heartbeat echoed like a war drum in the silence. In that moment, he recalled the faces of comrades who had fallen in battle, their sacrifices fueling his determination to survive against all odds. The city, with its labyrinthine backstreets and flickering neon signs, had long been a battleground for those who dared defy its hidden masters. For Vinny, the night had taken on a new meaning, a convergence of past loyalties and present danger. The echoes of footsteps, the distant hum of urban life, and the relentless drizzle formed a symphony of impending doom. As he pressed himself against the cold brick wall, he realized that his escape from the horrors of war was far from complete. A new enemy, cloaked in the guise of organized crime, was now determined to erase him from existence. In that dark moment, Vinny made a silent vow. He would not become a victim of fate, nor would he allow the sins of his past to dictate the course of his future. The decision was instantaneous, a spark of resolve amid the encroaching shadows. Every instinct screamed for survival, every fiber of his being prepared for the conflict that loomed ahead. The city, indifferent to the plight of a single man, carried on in its relentless, unforgiving rhythm, unaware that one man's struggle was about to ignite a storm of retribution and bloodshed. As the distant sound of tires on wet asphalt grew nearer, Vinny's pulse quickened. The hunt had begun, and with it, a deadly interplay between the remnants of a soldier's honor and the ruthless machinations of a mob empire. The night was young, and so was the promise of vengeance. With the rain as his shroud and the darkness as his ally, Vinny prepared to step into a battle that would test not only his survival skills but the very core of his identity. The hunt was no longer about evasion. It was a declaration of war against the forces that sought to control him, and by extension, the very soul of New Carthage. Every drop of rain, every echo in the night, told a story of impending conflict, a tale where loyalty was questioned and every move could be fatal. Vinny's journey into the heart of darkness had only just begun, and as the city swallowed him in its cold embrace, he vowed to confront the shadows with the same resolve that had once defined him as a soldier. The line between hunter and hunted blurred, and the stage was set for a confrontation that would shake the very foundations of power in a city built on secrets and lies. Below is Part 2 of the story, approximately 1,000 words. Vinny's heartbeat still thundered in his ears as he emerged from the narrow alley, the rain-drenched pavement glistening under the dim glow of streetlights. The encounter with the unknown pursuer had left him more alert than ever. Each step felt loaded with tension as he navigated the labyrinth of New Carthage's backstreets, every shadow a potential threat. His military training insisted on caution, yet his mind churned with questions. Who was tracking him? How had they found him? And most urgently, what did they want? Back in the city's underbelly, Rocco and his men were gathering at a discreet safe house, a converted warehouse near the docks. The air inside was heavy with tobacco smoke and the scent of stale coffee. Rocco, his features half obscured by a battered fedora, paced slowly in front of a whiteboard littered with maps and photographs. At the center of the board, a grainy image of Vinny stood, a reminder of the man who had upset Angelo Ferraro's carefully constructed world. Rocco's voice was low and measured as he outlined the plan to his team. "We know he's a trained soldier. He's not going to run, he'll fight. We need to keep the pressure on and force him into a trap. Use every resource at our disposal." His words were punctuated by the clack of a marker across the board as he drew lines connecting known safe houses, potential escape routes, and possible rendezvous points. As night deepened, Vinny took refuge in an abandoned building he'd repurposed as a temporary hideout. The space was sparse, with nothing more than a cot, a battered desk, and a small portable radio. In the quiet, Vinny allowed himself a moment of reflection. Memories of his military days surged through him, a time when discipline and brotherhood had been his only constants, but those days were long past. Now he was a man hunted, forced to rely on instincts honed in the heat of battle, and the harsh realities of survival in a city where trust was a luxury. In the solitude of his hideout, Vinny began piecing together what he knew about his pursuers. The single figure he'd glimpsed at the diner was not enough, but the realization that someone was persistently shadowing him ignited a plan. He scavenged through a box of old belongings, a few faded photographs, a medallion from a lost comrade, and a dog-eared notebook filled with coded entries. In the notebook lay potential clues to his own past operations and contacts that might aid him now. The entries spoke of clandestine meetings, safe houses, and names that had once meant everything in a world of covert operations. Vinny realized that his past might yet provide the key to survival in this perilous new chapter. Meanwhile, Rocco's team fanned out across New Carthage, following leads provided by street-level informants. Under the cover of darkness, a seasoned driver took to the rain-soaked streets, his car a nondescript sedan that melded seamlessly into the night. In a grimy diner off a forgotten avenue, a tired waitress passed on hushed whispers about a man in the shadows to a rugged informant. Each tidbit of information was meticulously relayed back to Rocco's network, gradually mapping Vinny's movements like pieces on a chessboard. The tension in the city was palpable. While Vinny fought to decipher the clues left behind by his past, Ferraro was orchestrating a broader campaign to reassert his dominance over New Carthage. Rumors of a renegade ex-soldier working against the mob's interests began to circulate in the darkest corners of the city. These rumors stoked fear among the mob's ranks, forcing some to question their loyalties. For Ferraro, such uncertainty was unacceptable. In a private meeting held at a high-rise overlooking the city's chaos, he confronted his closest advisors. "A man like Vinny is a spark in dry tinder," he growled. "If he ignites more than just whispers, our empire could crumble from within." His advisors exchanged wary glances, knowing that the slightest misstep could lead to a full-blown internal collapse. Back in his makeshift sanctuary, Vinny finally pieced together enough information to form a plan. He decided to reach out to an old contact, a former intelligence officer known only as the Raven, a moniker earned for his uncanny ability to disappear into the night. The Raven had once saved Vinny's life on a covert mission in Eastern Europe, and Vinny trusted that the man would provide a safe passage out of New Carthage, or, at the very least, valuable intelligence on his pursuers. Using an old, encrypted communicator hidden in the lining of his coat, Vinny sent a terse message. requesting a meeting at a location known only to those who had once served together. The message, coded in military shorthand, was dispatched into the ether of the city's surveillance network. Time was running thin. As Vinny waited for a reply, he meticulously surveyed every detail of his surroundings. Each creak of the building, each gust of wind rattling a loose window pane, was a reminder that his enemy might be closing in. Hours later, the communicator beeped, a discreet signal that the Raven had accepted the meeting. The designated rendezvous was a derelict industrial park on the outskirts of the city, a place abandoned by time but still frequented by those who preferred anonymity. On the night of the meeting, rain fell in relentless sheets as Vinny approached the meeting point. The industrial park was a maze of rusted machinery and broken concrete, illuminated only by sporadic flashes of lightning. Vinny moved cautiously, his eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of ambush. Every nerve was taut with anticipation. And then, from behind a dilapidated warehouse, emerged a tall figure clad in a dark trench coat, the Raven. His features were obscured by a wide-brimmed hat and a pair of mirrored sunglasses that somehow defied the storm's gloom. Without a word, the Raven handed Vinny a small envelope and a data chip. "There's more to this than you know," he murmured, his voice low and measured. "Ferraro's operation isn't just about silencing you, it's about erasing any trace of what you might reveal." Vinny's eyes narrowed as he absorbed the implications. The chip, once inserted into a secure reader, would reveal details about Ferraro's network, information that could dismantle an empire built on terror and deceit. But the weight of this knowledge was double-edged. Possessing it made Vinny a target not only for the mob's hitmen, but also for corrupt factions within the city who had much to lose if the truth emerged. As thunder rumbled overhead, the Raven faded into the shadows, leaving Vinny alone with the envelope and chip, a silent pact formed between men who had once shared the heat of battle. With his resolve steeling, Vinny resolved to dive deeper into the murky underworld of New Carthage, knowing that each step forward would draw him further into a web of betrayal and danger. The meeting had confirmed what he suspected. His enemy was not only cunning, but willing to sacrifice anything to protect their secrets. In the hours that followed, Vinny retreated to a safer location to study the data chip. The information it contained was staggering: detailed records of clandestine transactions, coded messages, and names of high-ranking officials entangled with Ferraro's operations. Each file painted a damning portrait of corruption, implicating individuals who had long evaded justice by the sheer force of intimidation. As Vinny absorbed the enormity of the revelations, a grim determination settled over him. The battle was no longer just about his survival. It had morphed into a mission to expose a systemic rot at the heart of New Carthage. Yet, even as Vinny prepared to mobilize against his unseen adversaries, danger lurked ever closer. Rocco's network had not missed a single move, and the clock was ticking towards the next inevitable confrontation. With every new piece of data, every whispered secret from the dark corners of the city, the stakes rose higher. Vinny's mind raced as he contemplated the cost of uncovering the truth, a cost that might be paid in blood. In this ruthless urban battlefield, trust was scarce, and every ally could be a potential enemy. Thus, with the storm raging outside as a grim backdrop, Vinny resolved to push forward, despite the overwhelming odds. The path ahead was fraught with peril, but armed with the knowledge from the data chip and the unyielding spirit of a soldier, he would confront the forces of corruption head-on. In the heart of New Carthage, the battle lines were being drawn, and the war between the hunted and the hunters had only just begun. Below is Part 3 of the story, approximately 1,000 words. Vinny sat alone in a cramped, dimly lit safe house on the outskirts of New Carthage, the weight of the revelations from the data chip pressing upon him like a loaded gun. The scattered files and digital dossiers painted a damning picture of corruption and collusion that stretched far beyond Ferraro's immediate influence. With each document he decrypted, the magnitude of his mission grew heavier. His hands trembled slightly as he scrolled through the meticulously cataloged secrets, bank accounts, illicit deals, and names that belonged to men in high places. Every byte of data was a potential spark to ignite a revolution or a bullet destined to seal his fate. Vinny's mind raced as he considered his next steps. The chip was both a weapon and a target. He knew that Ferraro's network, with its sprawling reach, would soon realize that their empire was built on fragile lies. The information could dismantle the mob's carefully constructed facade, but releasing it publicly would put a target on his back. Still, silence was no longer an option. His military instincts told him that the only way to survive was to strike decisively and expose the corruption festering within the city's veins. He began by creating a secure transmission, a coded message that he would send to an old ally known as Marco Silencer Bianchi, a former intelligence operative who now led an underground group committed to fighting corruption. Marco had once risked his life to help Vinny escape a covert ambush overseas, and Vinny trusted him implicitly. The message was brief, a few lines of encrypted text that detailed the urgency of the situation and requested an immediate meeting. It was the first step in forging a new alliance that might counterbalance the overwhelming might of Ferraro's organization. As Vinny transmitted the message, the storm outside intensified, echoing the turmoil raging within him. He knew the city's dark corners were about to become even darker. The tapping of rain on the roof sounded like a Morse code of impending doom. Every shadow that crept along the walls, every creak of the old building, reminded him that danger was never far behind. His thoughts wandered to the faces of those he'd lost, the comrades in arms who had fought beside him, and the innocents caught in the crossfire of relentless criminal ambition. Their memories fortified his resolve. He would not allow their sacrifices to be in vain. Outside the safe house, in the tangled web of New Carthage's backstreets, Rocco's operatives closed in. The network of informants had pinpointed Vinny's temporary sanctuary, and the hunt was intensifying. Rocco, ever the strategist, had orchestrated the pursuit like a maestro conducting a symphony of violence. His latest orders were clear: capture Vinny alive if possible, for the information he held was a potential liability that needed to be contained. To that end, Rocco dispatched 2 seasoned enforcers, known only by their call signs Viper and Hawk, to shadow Vinny's movements and ensure that no escape route was left unexplored. Unaware of the tightening noose, Vinny meticulously reviewed the data chip's contents, noting discrepancies in Ferraro's records and hints of an even larger conspiracy that implicated political figures and law enforcement officials. The deeper he delved, the more he realized that the mob's grip extended into every facet of New Carthage's society. The information wasn't just a tool for dismantling a criminal empire. It was a key to unearthing an entire network of betrayal and corruption that had long been hidden in plain sight. Hours later, as midnight approached and the rain began to taper into a drizzling mist, a nondescript car pulled up outside the safe house. Vinny's instincts kicked in immediately. He peered through a crack in the boarded-up window, eyes scanning the darkness for any sign of ambush. The car's engine idled softly, a sound that was both innocuous and ominous in the stillness of the night. Vinny's pulse quickened. He reached for his service pistol, his fingers feeling the familiar weight of cold metal as he moved quietly to the door. Before he could fully secure his exit, A muffled knock sounded at the back door. Vinny's heart pounded as he edged toward a hidden peephole. Through the small glass, he saw a figure in a raincoat, tall, lean, and unmistakably alert. The figure's features were obscured by the hood, but there was a determined glint in his eyes that spoke of experience. Vinny hesitated for a heartbeat, torn between the need for caution and the desperate desire for an ally. He opened the door a crack, keeping one eye on the shadowed figure. "I'm here for Marco," the stranger whispered urgently, glancing around as if the night itself might betray them. "They're onto you, Vinny. We don't have much time." The words sent a chill through him, not of fear, but of recognition. Marco's involvement meant that his plea for help had been received, and the mission was now expanding into a war that was far larger than he had anticipated. The stranger's presence was both a blessing and a curse. Vinny ushered him inside, shutting the door quickly behind them. The newcomer wasted no time, explaining in hushed tones that Rocco's men had been seen in the vicinity and that the safe house was compromised. There was no longer a safe haven in New Carthage's crumbling infrastructure. Marco's network was mobilizing, and Vinny was to rendezvous with a group at an abandoned railway yard on the city's edge, a location chosen for its isolation and its proximity to hidden underground passages known only to those who had once danced with danger. As they hurriedly gathered the essentials, a few maps, the data chip, and a sidearm, Vinny's thoughts churned with urgency. He questioned the loyalty of every contact he had, wondering if a mole lurked within his own circle. Trust, already a scarce commodity, was evaporating under the harsh light of betrayal. Every step forward now felt like walking a razor's edge. The storm of violence that was sure to follow would not discriminate between friend and foe, and Vinny was determined to navigate it with the precision of a soldier on a covert mission. They moved swiftly through the labyrinthine alleyways, the city's neon signs flickering like dying embers against the backdrop of urban decay. The rain had ceased, leaving the pavement slick and reflective, a mirror for a world gone mad. The sound of distant sirens and murmurs of unrest reminded them that New Carthage was on the brink of chaos. With each step, Vinny felt the weight of his choices bearing down upon him, the knowledge that his actions could either spark a revolution or plunge the city into further darkness. The journey to the railway yard was fraught with tension. Every corner concealed the threat of ambush. Every shadow held the possibility of an enemy waiting to strike. Yet, with Marco's unseen guidance transmitted through secure channels, Vinny's route was plotted with military precision. As they neared their destination, the abandoned tracks loomed ahead, a relic of an industrial age now serving as the stage for a new kind of battle. At the railway yard, a small cadre of Marco's trusted operatives awaited in silence, their faces etched with determination and the scars of past conflicts. In that grim gathering under the indifferent glow of a single overhead lamp, alliances were reaffirmed and strategies laid bare. Vinny knew that the days ahead would be a brutal test of his resolve, a confrontation where the lines between honor and survival would blur into a maelstrom of violence and retribution. With the damning evidence of Ferraro's empire in his possession, Vinny was now both a threat and a beacon of hope, a symbol of resistance in a city choking on its own corruption. As the meeting concluded, Vinny took a moment to look out over the desolate tracks, the weight of the mission sinking in. The information he carried was more than evidence. It was a weapon that could topple a corrupt regime, but it came at the cost of his anonymity and his life. With grim determination, he vowed to continue the fight, knowing that every step forward brought him closer to an inevitable clash with the forces that had made New Carthage their playground. In the silence of that forsaken yard, amid the rusting metal and echoes of a forgotten era, The stage was set for a war that would shake the foundations of the city and force its denizens to reckon with the hidden truths of their existence. Vinny's pulse pounded as he drove away from the railway yard, the city's neon glow dissolving into a blur of rain-slick streets. His escape was a narrow one, a high-octane dance of risk and cunning. The engine's hum mixed with the steady rhythm of his heartbeat as he merged onto the freeway. Behind him, the railway yard had been a crucible where old allegiances and new conspiracies collided, and ahead lay the uncertain promise of a safe haven. Yet every mile increased the danger. The web of Ferrero's reach was vast, and the mob boss's enforcers were relentless. As Vinny navigated the twisting, rain-soaked roads, his mind replayed the recent meeting with Marco's operatives. In that grim assembly, the stark reality of his predicament had crystallized. He was not merely a fugitive but a bearer of truths that could shatter the criminal empire that held New Carthage in its iron grip. The data chip, a repository of damning evidence, burned a hole in his possession. Even as it held the potential to expose corruption, it also marked him as a target. Every decision henceforth would be a balance between survival and the pursuit of justice. The safe house Marco had arranged was an abandoned warehouse on the city's edge, a structure swallowed by time, its crumbling walls and shattered windows bearing silent witness to decades of neglect. It was a place chosen for its seclusion, far from the prying eyes of Ferrero's informants. Vinny pulled up at dusk, the building looming like a relic of a bygone era. The heavy air carried a mix of rust and damp decay, and the only sound was the soft patter of residual rain on the metal roof. Inside, the warehouse was dimly lit by a few flickering bulbs. Shadows stretched across vast, empty spaces as Vinny made his way to a secluded corner where a battered cot and a rickety table awaited. He placed his few belongings carefully on the table, alongside the data chip, and a folded map of the city marked with potential safe routes and rendezvous points. The weight of the chip was almost physical, a burning reminder of the perilous task he had accepted. In the solitude of the warehouse, Vinny allowed his thoughts to settle into a methodical plan. He knew that to take on Ferrero's empire, he needed allies. His mind raced back to his days in the service, where trust was the bedrock of every mission. Now, that trust was a luxury. Even within Marco's network, the threat of betrayal loomed large. Every face in a crowded room could conceal a traitor. Every whispered word might carry a hidden agenda. He resolved that the next phase of his plan would involve meeting with a former journalist known for her fearless investigations into organized crime. Elena Cruz had once been a formidable watchdog of the city's underbelly, and her contacts might be the key to exposing Ferrero's web of corruption to the public. Vinny drafted a coded message to Elena using an old burner phone he'd recovered from his past. The message was short, a blend of urgency and caution. It read simply, "The truth bleeds. Meet at the old pier at midnight." He pressed send and then sat in silence, listening to the drip of water echo in the cavernous space. Each tick of the clock brought him closer to the meeting, and to the risk that every minute could herald another approach by Ferrero's men. As midnight approached, the warehouse fell into a deeper silence. Vinny's senses were on high alert. Every creak of the building, every distant sound from the city was scrutinized for hidden threats. The rain had ceased, leaving the world outside cloaked in darkness and uncertainty. When the time came, Vinny left the safe house, moving cautiously through deserted streets toward the old pier. The pier itself was a forgotten stretch of concrete jutting into the murky water, a remnant of a time when the city thrived on maritime trade. Now, it was a stage set for clandestine meetings, where shadows merged with secrets. At the pier, Vinny found Elena leaning against an old, rusted lamppost. Her eyes, sharp and determined, met his with a mix of relief and wariness. Without preamble, she whispered, "I've been following the ripple. The city is on the brink of an upheaval. Her tone was steady despite the tension that vibrated in the night air. She produced a small folder from her leather bag, the edges worn and stained from years of hard reporting. Inside, she continued, are documents and recordings linking Ferraro's network not only to organized crime, but to certain public officials. This isn't just about the mob. It's about a corruption that infects every corner of New Carthage. Vinny's heart skipped a beat. The revelations from Alina's folder dovetailed disturbingly with the data on the chip. He realized that the conspiracy ran deeper than he had imagined, reaching into the corridors of power. Together, they began piecing together the puzzle. Alina's investigative work provided context and corroborated the digital records Vinny had uncovered. They exchanged information rapidly, their whispered conversation punctuated by the distant sound of waves crashing against the pier's supports. In that precarious alliance, Vinny found a glimmer of hope. Alina had contacts, trusted journalists and activists who could help amplify the truth. Yet the meeting was short-lived. The distant rumble of a motor and the harsh glare of headlights split the darkness. Ferraro's enforcers had caught wind of the meeting. In a heartbeat, the calm was shattered by the intrusion of a black sedan that skidded to a halt a few paces away. Two men in dark suits stepped out, their expressions void of emotion. They moved with the precision of predators, circling the pier with cold determination. Alina's eyes widened and she grabbed the folder. "We need to go now," she hissed. Vinny's instincts kicked in immediately. He urged Alina to follow him as they ducked behind a cluster of shipping containers. The enforcers fanned out, their flashlights sweeping the area, casting long, ominous beams across the pier. Every second felt like an eternity as Vinny and Alina crouched in silence, their breathing shallow and synchronized with the pulse of danger. In the ensuing moments, Vinny's tactical training took over. He gestured silently to Alina, indicating a narrow gap between the containers that led to a side exit from the pier. With the enforcer's steps drawing nearer, the two slipped through the gap and darted along the shadowed edge of the waterfront. The sound of pursuit was muffled by the ambient noise of the darkened city and the lapping waves. Every heartbeat was a countdown, every step a gamble with fate. They reached a narrow alley that skirted a row of derelict warehouses. The alley was cluttered with discarded crates and forgotten relics, offering enough cover to momentarily hide from the relentless searchlights of their pursuers. Vinny paused, listening for the sound of footsteps. The enforcers' voices were distant now, fading as they followed another lead. Alina, her breath ragged but eyes resolute, clutched the folder tightly. "We're in deeper than I thought," she murmured. "The story is bigger than either of us." Vinny nodded, his mind racing through possibilities. The information they now possessed could dismantle an entire network of corruption, but it also painted a target on their backs. They knew they had to regroup with Marco's team and Alina's journalist contacts. The mission had evolved from survival to becoming the spark for a revolution against a city strangled by corruption. As they pressed forward into the night, the gravity of their actions loomed large, a dangerous game where every move could trigger chaos. With the safety of the alley behind them, Vinny led Alina toward a secondary safe house, a nondescript building tucked away in an industrial district. Inside, a small group of operatives gathered, their faces etched with the hardship of a long struggle against tyranny. In hushed tones, plans were redrawn and new strategies laid out. The revelation of the deep-seated corruption was to be disseminated through every channel available: newspapers, online platforms, and clandestine broadcasts. In that moment, Vinny and Alina's disparate paths converged into a single, perilous objective: to bring the truth into the light, no matter the cost. As the night yielded to the faint glow of dawn, Vinny looked out a grimy window at the awakening city. The stakes had never been higher, and every heartbeat was a reminder of the fragile line between justice and oblivion. In that silent, charged moment, he steeled himself for the battles to come, a battle that would test his resolve, his honor, and the very fabric of a city on the verge of collapse. Vinny awoke to the sound of distant sirens and the low hum of tension in the safe house. The previous night's escape and the revelations from Alina's dossier had left an indelible mark on him. Now, as the first rays of dawn crept through the grimy windows, he felt the weight of the mission settle in. The warehouse-turned safe house was filled with hushed conversations among Marco's operatives and Alina's trusted contacts. They had gathered around a battered wooden table strewn with maps, documents, and a few battered laptops, each device a gateway to exposing the corrupt network that had bled New Carthage for decades. Vinny's mind churned over the events of the previous night. The close call at the pier, the relentless pursuit by Ferraro's enforcers, and the dangerous gamble of aligning himself with Alina had all merged into a singular, daunting objective: dismantle the mob's stranglehold on the city. His military past had prepared him for chaos, but nothing had prepared him for a fight where every shadow might hide a traitor and every whispered word could betray a secret. Still, he knew that to succeed, he had to trust his instincts and the handful of loyal allies gathered around him. A low murmur of discussion filled the room as Marco, his face set in a mask of steely resolve, detailed the next phase of their plan. "We have to move quickly," he said, his voice firm yet measured. "Ferraro's men are closing in. Our safe house is compromised now. We need to secure the documents and distribute the evidence to as many independent channels as possible before they can shut us down." The urgency in his tone sparked a flurry of activity. Vinny listened intently as plans were laid out to relocate to a more secure location, a forgotten underground transit station known only to those who'd navigated New Carthage's underbelly in times of crisis. Alina, sitting beside Vinny, carefully opened her folder and spread out additional documents on the table. Her investigative work had unearthed connections that ran deep, links between the mob, corrupt officials, and even a few seemingly reputable businessmen. "This network is larger than we thought," she explained softly. "Ferraro's empire is just the tip of the iceberg. The files show multiple layers of protection and mutual interests. We need to expose every link to break their power." Her eyes, bright with determination, locked with Vinny's. In that moment, he understood that their fight was not just for survival, but for justice, a reckoning long overdue for a city ravaged by corruption. With the plan in place, the team began gathering what little they could carry. Vinny clutched the data chip and several physical documents, feeling the raw potential of the evidence in his hands. The underground station, their intended refuge, lay a few miles away beneath an abandoned metro line. It was a place where the world above seemed like a distant memory, and only those willing to walk through darkness could find solace. As the group slipped out of the safe house, every step was calculated, every pause a silent prayer that they wouldn't be ambushed. Outside, the city was already stirring, its streets a mix of early commuters and night owls who hadn't yet reconciled with the new day. The chill in the air was biting, a reminder that the night's turmoil still clung to the corners of New Carthage. Vinny led the way through narrow alleys and deserted streets, his senses alert for any sign of pursuit. Behind him, Alina and Marco's operatives kept a vigilant watch, their eyes scanning the gloom for the glint of a gun or the flash of headlights. In the heart of this journey, a sense of urgency mixed with an almost palpable hope. Every so often, Vinny caught fleeting glances of posters on crumbling walls, remnants of a city that once believed in its own strength. He wondered if exposing the truth would inspire that same belief once more. The evidence they carried wasn't just a threat to Ferraro, it was a beacon for those willing to rise against oppression. Yet, the risk was monumental. With every step toward the underground station, They edged closer to a confrontation that could either ignite a revolution or plunge them into deeper darkness. As they approached the entrance to the abandoned metro station, a cold wind swept through the narrow passage. The heavy iron gates, rusted and barely hanging on, creaked as they pushed them open. Inside the station was a cavern of silence, echoing with the faint memories of a bygone era. The group moved cautiously through the tunnel, their flashlights cutting through the darkness like slender blades. The air was thick with dust and the scent of disuse, a fitting metaphor for the forgotten promises of the city above. In a secluded corner of the station, Marco had prepared a makeshift command center. A battered table sat under a flickering fluorescent light, and on it lay several laptops, a satellite phone, and more maps detailing key locations in New Carthage. Here, they could coordinate their next moves away from the prying eyes of Ferraro's network. Vinny and Alina reviewed the documents once more, aligning every piece of evidence with the larger picture that was beginning to emerge. It was clear that Ferraro was not operating in isolation. His influence extended into governmental corridors and even the police force. The realization was staggering, a sprawling conspiracy that had bled the city dry for years. In this tense atmosphere, the team devised a multi-pronged strategy. Some members would infiltrate media channels, ensuring that the evidence would be broadcast to every corner of the city. Others would work to expose the corrupt officials, setting up meetings with trusted sources who had long been wary of the mob's influence. Vinny's role, as it had become, was to serve as the linchpin of this covert operation, a man with the tactical acumen to navigate the urban battlefield and the moral fortitude to see the mission through. He felt the heavy burden of responsibility, yet also a spark of determination that burned brighter than ever. For hours, the group worked in the subterranean confines of the station, their voices low and determined. The plan was meticulous and fraught with risks, but the stakes could not be higher. Vinny's thoughts drifted to the countless innocents who suffered under Ferraro's reign, to the silent majority waiting for someone to stand against the tide of corruption. In those moments, the mission transformed from a personal vendetta into a crusade, a fight for a city that had forgotten its own name. As the makeshift command center buzzed with urgent energy, distant sounds from the surface hinted that Ferraro's enforcers might already be mobilizing. The tension was almost unbearable, a tightly coiled spring ready to snap. Vinny exchanged a determined look with Marco and Alina. They all understood that the coming hours would define the future of New Carthage. With evidence in hand and the resolve to match, they prepared to launch their offensive against the entrenched powers that had ruled through fear for too long. The underground station, a relic of past resilience, had become their battleground. Every whispered word and every click of a keyboard was a small act of defiance against a system built on lies. As they finalized their plans and distributed the digital dossiers to trusted allies, Vinny could almost hear the murmurs of the city, the collective heartbeat of a people yearning for justice. In that dark, forgotten station, hope was kindled anew. The battle was far from over, but with every step they took, Vinny and his allies edged closer to a truth that could shatter the oppressive silence and usher in a new dawn for New Carthage. Vinny's eyes flickered open in the darkness of the underground station as the first tremors of unrest stirred above. The quiet hum of urgent voices and clattering keyboards filled the makeshift command center with a palpable tension. Every face in the room was etched with determination and anxiety, as the team awaited the next move in their plan to expose the sprawling corruption that had gripped New Carthage for too long. Outside, the distant wail of sirens mingled with the murmur of shifting crowds on the surface. Vinny knew that every minute they delayed increased the risk of discovery. With the digital dossiers sent to a network of trusted contacts and journalists, Their next step was to ensure that the physical evidence was also safely transmitted to allies in strategic positions around the city. Marco's fingers danced over a battered keyboard as he coordinated with operatives in various safe houses, assigning roles for extraction and dissemination. Vinny's mind churned with the implications of their actions. This was more than a covert operation. It was a battle for the very soul of New Carthage. As the team reviewed the latest intelligence reports, Alina's voice broke the heavy silence. "We've received confirmation that a convoy of Ferraro's enforcers is converging on our location," she said softly, her eyes locked on the screen displaying a series of red dots pinpointing movements across the city. "They must have intercepted one of our signals." The words sent a shiver down Vinny's spine. His past had taught him that the enemy never rested, and now Ferraro's network was mobilizing with deadly precision. Vinny rose from his seat and moved to the small, grimy window overlooking the deserted platform. Rain had started to fall again, the droplets tapping out a rhythm of impending danger. "We don't have much time," he murmured. "We need to split up. Some of you take the evidence to your rendezvous points. The rest of us will set up a diversion to draw them away." His voice was calm but laced with the urgency of a man who had seen too much bloodshed to allow hesitation. Marco nodded, his eyes hardening as he issued orders. "I'll lead a team to create a distraction near the main entrance. Vinny, you take Alina and the rest of the evidence and head towards the east exit. We'll use the old maintenance tunnels to throw them off our trail." The plan was risky, but every move was calculated in a city where trust was scarce and betrayal was a constant threat. The team quickly dispersed into two groups. Vinny, clutching a case containing the physical evidence and the data chip, slipped into the shadows alongside Alina. Their path was lit only by the weak beam of a handheld flashlight as they crept through narrow corridors, their footsteps muffled by layers of dust and decay. Every creak of the old structure seemed to echo the sound of approaching danger. Vinny's thoughts raced back to the faces of those who had suffered under Ferraro's reign. He had once believed in order and duty. Now, every step was a desperate bid for justice. As they navigated the labyrinthine corridors, a sudden explosion echoed in the distance, a carefully orchestrated distraction from Marco's team. The tremor of the blast reverberated through the tunnel walls, sending a plume of dust cascading down like ghostly shrouds. Alina paused to steady herself, her eyes wide as she whispered, "They're coming." Vinny signaled for silence and quickened his pace, every sense heightened. The sound of heavy boots and raised voices reached them in faint bursts, a grim reminder that Ferraro's enforcers were relentless. Emerging into a wider passageway, Vinny and Alina paused at a rusted door that led to an exit. The door creaked open slowly, and beyond it lay a network of old service corridors that ran beneath the city's surface. The corridor was dark and claustrophobic, the air stale with disuse. Here, every shadow could hide a threat, and every sound was amplified by the acoustics of the underground maze. They moved swiftly, guided by the faint glow of emergency exit signs that flickered overhead. At one juncture, a low murmur of voices echoed from a side passage. Vinny motioned for Alina to take cover behind a stack of old crates. Peering cautiously from his hiding spot, he saw two figures discussing their next move in hushed tones. They were not part of Ferraro's team, at least, not that he could immediately discern. Instead, they appeared to be local scavengers, drawn to the underground tunnels by the chaos above. Vinny weighed his options. Any contact in these passages could be a liability. Trust was a currency he could ill afford, and so he kept his distance, silently urging Alina to remain still. After a tense few minutes, the voices faded, and Vinny signaled it was safe to proceed. They emerged onto a narrow service ramp that led upward toward the city's industrial district. Rainwater had pooled on the slick concrete steps, reflecting the muted glow of streetlights above. The air here was thick with the smell of damp metal and oil, a stark contrast to the cold, calculated environment of the underground station. Every step forward brought them closer to a new safe house, a rendezvous point that had been prearranged with a local resistance group fighting against the mob's corruption. Back in the command center, Marco's team was engaged in their own battle of wits. The sound of approaching enforcers had forced them to adopt guerrilla tactics, leading to skirmishes that rattled the ancient structure. Through a crack in the wall, Marco watched as a group of masked men surged into the corridor, their faces set in grim determination. Every second was a fight for survival, and every moment that the enemy gained ground was a victory for Ferraro's dark empire. Vinny and Alina's journey, however, was not without its perils. As they reached an intersection of service tunnels, a sudden metallic clang reverberated through the passage. Vinny's hand instinctively went to his sidearm. In the dim light, a figure emerged from behind a pillar, a lone hitman, his eyes cold and calculating. The man's presence was a stark reminder that Ferraro's reach extended into every hidden corner of the city. Without a word, the hitman advanced. Vinny and Alina exchanged a quick glance, a silent communication forged in the crucible of danger. Vinny moved first, stepping forward with the precision of a seasoned soldier. The hitman's hand hovered near his own weapon, but Vinny's speed and determination caught him off guard. In the ensuing struggle, the narrow corridor became a theater of desperation and adrenaline. The clash of fists and the staccato bursts of gunfire punctuated the darkness as Vinny fought with everything he had, the weight of his mission propelling his every move. When the struggle ended, the hitman lay incapacitated on the cold concrete floor, a silent casualty of a conflict that was far from over. Vinny's chest heaved as he steadied his breathing, his eyes scanning the corridor for any sign of reinforcements. The threat was not eliminated, it was merely delayed. Alina, trembling yet resolute, helped Vinny secure the scene before they resumed their journey upward. Climbing the final set of steps, Vinny and Alina finally emerged into the chill night air of the industrial district. The cityscape before them was a jumble of dimly lit warehouses and abandoned factories, all silent witnesses to the turmoil raging below. Their safe house was hidden behind a facade of dilapidated brick, its unassuming exterior belying the secure haven within. As they approached, a pair of eyes watched from a darkened window, a silent guardian whose alertness ensured that the safe house remained undiscovered by Ferraro's forces. Inside, the safe house was modest but fortified, with reinforced doors and a network of hidden passageways. Here, Vinny laid down the evidence and the remnants of their ordeal. His hands still trembled with adrenaline, and every scar on his body was a reminder of the price he paid for truth. Alina immediately set to work, organizing the documents and preparing them for transmission to her contacts. Their collaboration had evolved into something more than a tactical alliance. It was a mutual commitment to a cause that transcended personal survival. As the night deepened and the storm subsided into a heavy drizzle, Vinny allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. The city above was waking to a new day, oblivious to the war being waged beneath its surface. He knew that the battle was far from over, that Ferraro's enforcers would regroup, and that the full might of the mob's empire would soon be unleashed in a desperate bid to silence them. But for now, in this hidden sanctuary, hope flickered like a fragile flame in the darkness. In that precarious calm, Vinny's resolve hardened. Each step he had taken, every narrow escape, was a testament to his belief that the truth, once revealed, would be the spark that could set New Carthage free from the tyranny of corruption. With Alina's steadfast determination by his side and Marco's operatives fighting on every front, The stage was set for a confrontation that promised to upend the established order and usher in a new era of accountability. The safe house hummed with a quiet urgency as plans were redrawn and contingencies mapped out. Vinny's mind, ever alert and battle-hardened, focused on the next critical move, a risky maneuver that would see them infiltrate one of Ferraro's key strongholds. The evidence they possessed was both shield and sword, and in the hands of those who dared to stand against oppression, it would be the instrument of change. As the night gave way to the first hints of dawn, Vinny and his allies braced themselves for what lay ahead. The battle for New Carthage was far from over, and every shadow in the coming light held the promise of both danger and redemption. Vinny's mind raced as he prepared for the next dangerous phase of the operation. In the dim light of the safe house, a map of New Carthage sprawled across a scarred wooden table, marked with strategic points, Ferraro's compound, key intersections, and escape routes that had been painstakingly scouted out by Marco's team. Every line on the map was a potential lifeline or a trap waiting to be sprung. The evidence they had secured and the intelligence Alina had gathered now pointed to one critical stronghold, a nondescript building in the heart of the city that served as the nerve center for Ferraro's operations. Vinny knew that infiltrating this stronghold was the only way to dismantle the command structure from within. Alina, with her unwavering determination, reviewed the dossier spread before them. "This building isn't just a front," she said softly, tracing her finger over a grainy photograph of the compound. "It's where the major decisions are made, where the money and power converge. If we can access the inner sanctum and retrieve additional files, we might be able to expose the entire network." Her eyes, fierce and resolute, met Vinny's. There was no room for hesitation. Time was running short, and every moment left increased the risk of their cover being blown. The plan was risky. Vinny, Alina, and a small team of Marco's operatives would split into two groups. One team, led by Vinny, would create a diversion on the perimeter to draw enforcers away from the building's less guarded rear entrance. The other, a more stealth-oriented group, would use the confusion to breach the inner security and secure any remaining evidence. The division of roles was a testament to the trust they had built over countless dangerous encounters, yet the stakes were enormous. Failure could mean not only the loss of crucial evidence, but also the complete annihilation of any hope for exposing Ferraro's empire. As preparations were finalized in the safe house, a palpable tension filled the air, a tension that mingled with the acrid scent of burning coffee and the distant hum of the awakening city. Vinny took a moment to mentally rehearse every step of the operation, drawing on his years of military experience. The plan was clear: hit hard, create chaos, and vanish into the maze of New Carthage's labyrinthine streets before the mob could regroup. The memory of past battles lent him strength, and he silently vowed that the mission would succeed, no matter the cost. At precisely 3:00 a.m., the team mobilized. Under a cloak of darkness, Vinny's group emerged from the safe house, their movements synchronized like a well-oiled machine. Rain still dripped from the eaves of abandoned buildings, and the slick streets reflected the muted glow of streetlights as they moved toward the target. Vinny led the way, his senses heightened as every footstep echoed on the wet pavement. The city, asleep and unaware, was about to become the stage for a high-stakes confrontation. Their approach was methodical. The team reached a narrow side street adjacent to the compound, where a series of maintenance vents and service doors provided a less conspicuous entry point. Vinny's heart pounded in rhythm with the steady tap of raindrops. He signaled to his team to split into pairs. One pair was tasked with planting small, controlled incendiary devices near the main entrance to generate a diversion, enough to force Ferraro's enforcers to concentrate on that area, while the other pair, equipped with silenced weapons and lock-picking tools, moved toward the rear door. In the ensuing moments, the diversion was set in motion. A series of controlled explosions rang out near the compound's front, and alarms shrieked in response. As expected, a heavy contingent of enforcers poured toward the source of the disturbance. Vinny and his team, shrouded in the chaos, slipped into the shadow of the building. Every second was a blend of adrenaline and precision as they navigated dim corridors and silent hallways, their progress punctuated by the occasional distant shout or flash of a security light. Inside the compound, the tension was palpable. Vinny's team found themselves in a narrow hallway lined with reinforced doors. The objective was a locked archive room rumored to contain further incriminating files. Elena's earlier intelligence had hinted at digital logs and hard copies of transactions that connected Ferraro to political figures, law enforcement, and other underworld figures. With deft movements, one of the operatives picked the lock, and the door creaked open, revealing a small room illuminated by the soft glow of computer screens and stacks of paper files. Every detail in the room was meticulously recorded, an intricate web of correspondence, coded spreadsheets, and handwritten notes. Vinny's eyes scanned the room, and he quickly signaled his team to gather as much evidence as possible. Elena, ever resourceful, connected a portable data drive to one of the computers, initiating a rapid download of the digital files. The process was tense, every second laden with the risk that someone might breach the room. Yet the atmosphere was focused, each member of the team silently contributing to a singular purpose: to uncover and expose the corruption that had held the city in its grip for so long. Outside, the chaos of the diversion continued unabated. Explosions, shouts, and the clamor of enforcers created a cacophony that obscured the subtle sounds of activity inside the compound. The diversion was working as planned, buying Vinny and his team precious minutes to secure the evidence. Once the digital download reached a satisfactory level, Elena carefully backed up the files onto multiple devices, a redundancy born from the awareness that trust in technology was as fragile as the alliances they had forged. With the evidence secured, Vinny's team began to retrace their steps, their departure marked by cautious optimism and the ever-present threat of being discovered. As they moved toward the rear exit, the distant sounds of enforcers grew louder, and the corridors echoed with the tension of imminent confrontation. Vinny's heart pounded with a mix of triumph and anxiety: triumph for the success of the operation so far, and anxiety for the uncertain journey ahead. Exiting the compound through a service door, the team found themselves in a narrow alleyway where shadows merged with the faint light of a flickering street lamp. The diversion had successfully pulled most of Ferraro's forces away, leaving only a scattered few in pursuit. Vinny motioned for silence, and the team melted into the darkness. Their exit was a narrow thread of hope woven through the tapestry of danger that was New Carthage. As they moved deeper into the maze of back alleys, every step was a calculated risk, a step that carried them further from the compound and closer to safety. The evidence they now carried was more than just a collection of documents and digital files. It was the key to toppling an empire built on blood and deceit. Vinny's resolve hardened with each passing moment, the mission taking on a significance that transcended his own survival. In that quiet determination lay the promise of justice, a promise that would soon resonate throughout a city desperate for change. By the time they reached the predetermined extraction point, a discreet pickup location concealed behind an old, graffiti-covered wall, Vinny's team had overcome both physical obstacles and the ever-looming threat of capture. Their success was measured not only in the tangible evidence secured, but also in the knowledge that the truth was now out there, waiting to ignite the spark of revolution. As Vinny looked over the collected files and digital backups, he couldn't help but feel that this was only the beginning. The night's operation had been a critical blow against Ferraro's empire, and it was now up to the people of New Carthage to reclaim their city from the clutches of corruption. Vinny's heart still pounded in his ears as he and his dwindling team raced through the winding maze of New Carthage's back alleys. The adrenaline from their daring infiltration of Ferraro's compound still surged through his veins, yet every step forward now was a reminder that the battle was far from over. They moved cautiously, slipping beneath the veil of darkness as the city began to stir with the quiet murmur of early morning. Somewhere behind them, chaos reigned, Ferraro's enforcers scrambling to regroup, their shouts echoing off brick walls and abandoned storefronts. But for now, Vinny's team had the precious evidence that could dismantle the sprawling network of corruption. They reached a derelict building that served as a secondary safe house, hidden behind layers of urban decay. In the dim interior, the group huddled together, breathing heavily and exchanging wary glances. Alina, her hands still trembling from the intensity of the operation, immediately began verifying the integrity of the digital downloads on a battered laptop. The files held intricate records of bank transfers, coded communications, and names that linked Ferraro to influential figures in government and law enforcement. Her fingers danced over the keys as she cross-referenced dates and figures, confirming that this evidence was not just enough to break Ferraro's hold on the city, but to expose an entire web of collusion that had suffocated New Carthage for years. Across the room, Marco's operatives quietly ensured that every document and device was secured in waterproof, shock-resistant cases. The weight of their mission pressed upon them, a responsibility that went beyond personal survival. Vinny's gaze drifted to a crumbling wall adorned with old graffiti, a testament to the city's lost hopes and dreams. In that fleeting moment, he resolved that they would not allow the truth to remain buried beneath layers of intimidation and fear. Every scrap of evidence was a spark, a potential ignition for a revolution that might finally free New Carthage from its iron grip. Outside the safe house, the early light began to filter through broken windows, casting long, distorted shadows on the cracked pavement. The city was awakening to another day of uncertainty, its inhabitants largely unaware that a decisive battle was being waged in their midst. Vinny took a moment to step outside, feeling the cool air wash over him. He closed his eyes briefly, recalling the countless nights spent in combat, where survival meant trusting nothing but one's own instincts. Now, those instincts had guided him through a labyrinth of danger and deception, and the mission ahead was as clear as it was daunting. A secure line on a patched-together satellite phone buzzed with an urgent message from an insider embedded deep within Ferraro's organization. The voice was low and measured, hinting at secrets that even Vinny had yet to uncover. "They're mobilizing reinforcements," the message warned, "and Ferraro's planning something big. You must move the evidence immediately. We have a rendezvous point near the old city archives." Vinny's grip tightened around the phone as he relayed the instructions to the assembled team. The archives were a relic of a more hopeful past, a place that now stood as a silent witness to the city's decay and the rising tide of defiance. The decision was unanimous. With little time to spare, Vinny and Alina led a small contingent, carrying the secured evidence and digital backups out of the safe house. The group navigated through a network of side streets and forgotten passageways, where every corner might hide a threat. The plan was to rendezvous with a cadre of investigative journalists and civic activists, whose combined reach could ensure that the truth would be broadcast to every corner of New Carthage. Each step was measured, each pause a careful assessment of the risks ahead. As they neared the outskirts of the central district, the urban landscape began to change. Towering modern structures gave way to weathered stone buildings and narrow lanes that whispered of history. It was in this area, near the old city archives, that the underground resistance had established a temporary command center. Vinny's team slipped into a back alley, emerging near a nondescript door with a faded emblem of a phoenix, a symbol of rebirth and hope. Inside, a group of journalists huddled around a cluttered table, their eyes alight with determination and the promise of change. A lead journalist, known only as Ria, stepped forward to greet them. "We've been waiting," she said quietly, her voice resolute despite the evident exhaustion lining her face. Without wasting a moment, Vinny handed over the cases containing the damning evidence. Ria and her colleagues immediately began setting up secure transmissions and preparing to relay the information to trusted media outlets across the country. The process was delicate. Every file had to be verified and every name cross-checked before the truth could be unleashed upon a city that had long suffered under a reign of terror. Amid the hurried preparations, Vinny found a moment to reflect on the enormity of what they had achieved so far. The files, the recordings, and the intercepted communications all pointed to a level of corruption that extended far beyond the reach of Ferraro's petty criminal activities. It was a scandal that implicated not just mob enforcers, but public officials and businessmen who had long hidden behind a facade of legitimacy. For Vinny, who had once been a soldier dedicated to a code of honor, this was a personal crusade, a chance to fight a battle not just with weapons, but with truth as his shield. Outside, distant sounds of armored vehicles and shouting echoed through the streets. The safehouse's earlier diversion had only bought them precious moments, and now it was clear that Ferraro's forces were closing in. Ria's eyes flicked to a monitor that displayed the live feed from a covert camera installed by her network. The feed showed swathes of uniformed men converging on the area, their intentions unmistakably hostile. "We need to get out," she whispered urgently. "They're on their way." Vinny quickly gathered the remaining team members. With Ria's assistance, they ushered the journalists and activists into a secured back room behind the archives, one that had been reinforced and fortified against any immediate assault. The tension in the room was nearly tangible, a shared understanding that the coming hours would be critical in determining the fate of the city. Vinny, his mind still racing with the sound of approaching footsteps and the weight of the evidence, urged everyone to stay alert and prepared for a potential standoff. As the first enforcers reached the vicinity of the archives, a brief but fierce exchange of voices and the crackle of distant gunfire filtered through the walls. The resistance group, having anticipated such an assault, had fortified their position with barricades and makeshift alarms. Outside, chaos reigned as Ferraro's men attempted to breach the perimeter. Inside, the resolve of the assembled journalists and activists crystallized into an unspoken promise: the truth would not be silenced. In a quiet corner of the room, Elena rechecked the integrity of the data on her portable drives, her eyes steely with determination. Vinny approached her, nodding silently in acknowledgement of the sacrifice and risk that they had all undertaken. They had become unlikely warriors in a battle fought on the front lines of information, a battle that would expose the festering rot at the heart of New Carthage's power structure. Time ticked by slowly, each second laden with tension and the knowledge that a single misstep could plunge them into chaos. Outside, the clamor of conflict grew louder, and a surge of adrenaline swept over everyone present. Vinny steadied himself, his mind focusing on the task at hand, to ensure that the evidence reached the hands of those who could ignite a revolution. In that pivotal moment, the stakes were not merely personal. They were the future of an entire city poised on the brink of change. As dawn broke over New Carthage, streaks of pale light began to penetrate the darkness, casting long shadows that danced on the walls of the archives. The coordinated efforts of the resistance were in full swing. The evidence was being uploaded to secure servers and disseminated to multiple news outlets simultaneously. Across the city, televisions flickered on, radios crackled to life, and smartphones buzzed with breaking news. The story of Ferraro's empire and the deep-seated corruption that had plagued New Carthage was no longer hidden in the shadows. Vinny watched silently as the first headlines scrolled across screens. Mob boss exposed, unraveling the web of corruption. High-level scandal rocks New Carthage, and citizen resistance takes stand against organized crime. In that moment, he felt a bittersweet mix of triumph and trepidation. The truth, once a dormant ember, had burst into flame, a beacon of hope and a target for those who would stop at nothing to silence it. Yet as the city awoke to a new reality, Vinny knew that the fight was far from over. Ferraro's reach was long, and the fallout from this revelation would ripple through every layer of society. But for now, in the quiet aftermath of chaos and the first light of dawn, a new chapter had begun. The battle for justice was now being waged not only in the dark alleys and hidden safe houses of New Carthage, but in the hearts and minds of its people. In that fragile moment of victory, Vinny allowed himself a brief smile, a recognition that every risk taken, every sacrifice made, had paved the way for a future where the truth might finally set them free. And as the city stirred with the promise of change, he steeled himself for the next inevitable confrontation, knowing that the struggle for justice would demand every ounce of courage and determination he possessed. Vinny stood in the early morning light outside the archives, the remnants of last night's chaos still echoing in his ears. The city was awakening to the explosion of truth they had unleashed, yet the threat of Ferraro's wrath loomed ominously over New Carthage. In the hours following the dissemination of damning evidence, Vinny had barely a moment to breathe. His team was scattered, some helping journalists finalize the release of incriminating files, others fading back into the labyrinth of the city, and a few, including him, preparing for what they feared would be a massive retaliatory strike from Ferraro's network. Every instinct told him that the mob boss would not let his empire unravel without a fierce counterattack. The air was cool and heavy with anticipation as Vinny gathered with Marco's remaining operatives in a shadowed alcove behind an abandoned industrial complex. The group's faces were etched with fatigue and determination. Elena's earlier transmission had confirmed that multiple law enforcement agencies were beginning to mobilize, spurred by the public outcry. Yet, that very exposure had also galvanized Ferraro's loyalists, who now converged on strategic points across the city. Vinny knew that while the truth was their greatest weapon, it had also painted a target on their backs. "We have about an hour before their next move," Vinny said in a low, steady voice. "Ferraro's men are already gathering and our safe routes might soon be compromised. We need to regroup and set up our next defensive line." His words cut through the murmurs of agreement. Marco, leaning against a rusted metal support, scanned a handheld map dotted with recent intelligence reports. "There's an old subway station a few blocks east," he observed. "It has multiple exits and service tunnels. It could serve as a temporary command post and a fallback if we need to regroup." The plan was immediate and risky. Vinny and his closest allies, Elena, Marco, and two other trusted operatives, slipped away from the makeshift extraction point and headed through narrow side streets, blending into the early morning haze. The sound of distant sirens, intermingled with sporadic shouts, reminded them that Ferraro's enforcers were mobilizing rapidly. The streets of New Carthage, still reeling from the explosive revelation of corruption, were now an urban battleground where every shadow concealed danger. Navigating through the maze of back alleys, Vinny's mind replayed the events that had led them here. The daring infiltration of Ferraro's compound, the successful diversion, the perilous escape, and finally, the moment when the truth went public. Each memory carried the weight of sacrifice and the knowledge that there was no turning back. Every step felt both like a victory and a descent into an ever-deepening struggle. He recalled the determined eyes of the journalists, the steely resolve of his allies, and even the fleeting moment of triumph when headlines across the city declared the fall of an empire built on blood and lies. By the time they reached the entrance to the old subway station, the city was transforming into a battlefield. Dark, imposing figures patrolled the periphery, their presence a constant reminder of Ferraro's unwavering grip on power. The group ducked into the station just as a distant explosion rocked a nearby block, a signal that the mob's counteroffensive had begun in earnest. The station's corridors were dark and damp, the stale air heavy with the scent of oil and old concrete. Flickering fluorescent lights cast erratic shadows as Vinny and his team moved cautiously to a secure platform area, where Marco had previously set up a rudimentary command center. Inside this subterranean sanctuary, the tension was palpable. Elena immediately began tapping away at a portable laptop, monitoring incoming communications from their network of informants and sympathetic officers in the police department. "We're receiving multiple reports of armed groups converging on central intersections," she murmured, her voice steady despite the underlying urgency. "Ferraro's enforcers are moving faster than we anticipated." Marco interjected quietly, "Our extraction routes are being compromised. We must assume that every exit is under surveillance." Vinny's mind raced as he considered the options. Their goal now was to maintain a foothold in the city long enough to protect the evidence, and by extension, the nascent revolution that was unfolding. The press had already started to expose the corruption at the highest levels, but with Ferraro's men intensifying their hunt, they needed a secure location to coordinate a counteroffensive. "We'll use the tunnels to split up," Vinny said decisively. "Some of us will stay here to monitor and relay information. Others will move to safe zones prearranged by our contacts. We need to disrupt Ferraro's command and, if possible, neutralize key assets that allow him to maintain control." A murmur of agreement passed among the group. Vinny quickly outlined a plan. While a small team would hold the command center and coordinate with the emerging civilian resistance, another group would head out to intercept a suspected armory where Ferraro's forces were stockpiling arms. "Disrupting their supply will slow their response," Vinny reasoned. "Every delay buys us more time." Elena's eyes glowed with the resolve of someone who had seen firsthand how truth could empower a desperate populace. "I'll send a message to the press," she declared. "We need to keep the public informed so that any crackdown will face the full fury of a people awakened." The hours stretched on as Vinny's team split up in coordinated moves, each tasked with a critical mission. Vinny led the group heading for the armory. Moving through deserted streets and abandoned lots, they avoided the main thoroughfares where Ferraro's enforcers were most concentrated. Every step was a calculated risk. The sound of a distant engine or an unfamiliar footfall could signal an ambush. The urban terrain had become a chessboard, with every intersection a potential battleground. Reaching the designated location, a warehouse camouflaged by layers of graffiti and neglect, Vinny signaled for the team to take cover. Through a broken window, they surveyed the interior. Rows of crates and stacked pallets suggested a makeshift stockpile of weapons and supplies. Vinny's heart pounded at the sight. Destroying or capturing this cache would deal a significant blow to Ferraro's operational capacity. With silent precision, they positioned themselves, using the cover of darkness to move closer to the target. Inside the warehouse, a low hum of voices and the occasional clatter of equipment reached their ears. Vinny counted on the element of surprise. In a flurry of movement, his team breached the door, neutralizing two guards with silenced weapons. A terse, chaotic firefight ensued. The confined space amplified every shot and whispered command as Vinny and his team worked to secure the stockpile. The battle was brief but brutal. Every life, every bullet, carrying the weight of the larger conflict raging above ground. When the echoes subsided, the warehouse fell into an eerie silence, punctuated only by the heavy breaths of the combatants. Vinny's team quickly gathered what they could, planting charges near the most critical sections of the armory. "This should disrupt their operations for a while," Vinny murmured, watching as timed explosives were set. In moments, the charges detonated, and a controlled explosion rocked the warehouse, sending a shockwave that rippled through the surrounding district. From the command center in the subway, reports began to filter in. Confusion among Ferraro's forces, a temporary halt in their advance, and glimpses of civilians emerging onto the streets in defiant protest. Back in the underground station, the atmosphere was electric with both relief and determination. Alina's updates confirmed that the press was abuzz with the latest developments. As headlines blared the story of the armory disruption and more evidence of the mob's ties to public officials, the tide of public opinion seemed to turn ever more decisively in favor of the citizen resistance. Yet, even amid this burgeoning hope, Vinny knew the danger was far from over. Ferraro's empire was built on violence, and he would not yield without unleashing every weapon in his arsenal. The underground command center buzzed with coordinated efforts to secure safe routes for those planning to evacuate, distribute evidence to additional media outlets, and fortify positions across the city. Vinny's thoughts drifted to the countless people who had suffered under the oppressive rule, families living in fear, workers silenced by intimidation, and a community desperate for change. With every move he made, Vinny felt both the burden and the honor of leading this insurgency against an entrenched system of corruption. As the day unfolded, clashes erupted on multiple fronts. Small pockets of resistance faced off against loyalist squads in fierce urban skirmishes, while the public rallied in spontaneous demonstrations demanding accountability. Amid the chaos, Vinny maintained constant communication with his allies, mapping out the next phase of their counteroffensive. The evidence they had secured was now being used to systematically dismantle Ferraro's network, one corrupt link at a time. In a final moment of quiet before the next surge of conflict, Vinny took a solitary walk through the dim corridors of the subway station. He allowed himself a brief pause, reflecting on how far they had come, from a hunted ex-soldier to the reluctant leader of a revolution. The road ahead was uncertain, paved with danger and sacrifice, yet for the first time in a long while, hope burned in his chest like a steady flame. The battle for New Carthage was not over, but the truth was out, and it would be the guiding light in the darkness to come. Vinny stood on a crumbling overpass overlooking New Carthage as the early afternoon sun broke through lingering storm clouds. The city, once shrouded in darkness and fear, now pulsed with an uneasy hope. In the weeks that had followed the explosive revelations and the crippling blow to Ferraro's armory, the tide of public opinion had shifted dramatically. News outlets ran non-stop exposés that detailed the mob boss's intricate web of corruption, implicating influential figures across every level of government and law enforcement. As demonstrators flooded the streets demanding justice, a palpable sense of renewal began to take root. Vinny, still scarred by the battles he had fought and the sacrifices made by his comrades, allowed himself a moment to reflect on the path that had led him here. The turning point had come when the combined efforts of the underground resistance, the brave investigative journalists, and even dissenting elements within the police force had converged in a coordinated push against Ferraro's empire. The final blow, however, was delivered not in the chaos of gunfire, but in a courtroom where overwhelming evidence could no longer be ignored. Vinny's trusted allies had worked tirelessly to compile a comprehensive dossier from the files and digital records he had risked everything to secure. When the evidence was handed over to a special task force established by reform-minded officials, it ignited a cascade of arrests and resignations. Ferraro, once untouchable in his fortress of corruption, was finally indicted on multiple charges. His enforcers and crooked officials were swept aside in a swift and resolute crackdown that sent shockwaves through New Carthage's criminal underworld. In the days leading up to the trial, the city transformed. Billboards and public service announcements reminded citizens of the power of unity against tyranny. Vinny, who had long carried the weight of guilt and isolation as a hunted ex-soldier, now found himself hailed as a reluctant hero. But his journey was not defined by accolades. It was the quiet determination to see justice prevail that resonated most deeply with him. He had never sought glory, only the truth, and a chance for redemption for himself and the countless lives marred by Ferraro's reign. At the trial, the courtroom was packed with citizens, journalists, and those who had suffered under the mob's oppressive shadow. Elena's meticulous records, Marco's encrypted messages, and the damning digital evidence were all laid bare before an impartial jury. The trial unfolded like a meticulously orchestrated drama. Witness after witness testified, corroborating every dark detail of Ferraro's operations. The prosecuting attorney, a steely-eyed reformer who had once been a victim of the mob's intimidation, delivered a searing closing argument that left no room for doubt. In that moment, the collective voice of a long-silenced people roared through the chamber. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, the impact was immediate. Ferraro was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole, and his key lieutenants received long prison terms. The fall of Ferraro's empire was as complete as it was sudden. With the dismantling of the criminal network, New Carthage began the slow process of healing. Community leaders, activists, and honest public servants took up the mantle of rebuilding trust in institutions. The press, once held captive by fear and bribery, emerged as a powerful watchdog, dedicated to ensuring that the corruption of the past would never be repeated. Elena continued her work as an investigative journalist, now with a renewed sense of purpose, determined to chronicle the city's rebirth. Vinny, though he felt the scars of battle in every quiet moment, found solace in the fact that his sacrifices had helped restore a measure of justice and dignity to the city. On a warm afternoon several months later, Vinny returned to the same overpass where he had once watched the city in turmoil. The view was transformed. Where once there were dark, foreboding alleys and derelict structures, now green parks and community centers had taken root. Families strolled along clean sidewalks, and vibrant murals celebrated the triumph of truth over tyranny. Vinny's eyes, tired but resolute, reflected a mixture of relief and lingering sorrow. He had lost many friends along the way, and the memories of violent confrontations and sleepless nights would remain etched in his mind. Yet, amid the quiet hum of renewed life, there was an unmistakable sense that the cycle of fear had been broken. In a modest ceremony held at a newly established civic center, representatives of the reformed government paid tribute to those who had risked everything to bring down the criminal empire. Vinny was invited to speak, not as a celebrated warrior, but as a man who had once been consumed by the ghosts of his past. His words, delivered with a calm and measured sincerity, resonated with a crowd eager for hope. "We have all paid a price for freedom," he said, his voice steady against the murmurs of the assembly. "But let us remember that the light of truth, though sometimes hard one, is the most enduring legacy we can leave for our children. His message of resilience and responsibility struck a chord, urging the citizens of New Carthage to safeguard their hard-fought gains. As the ceremony concluded and the crowd dispersed into the rejuvenated streets, Vinny wandered off to a quiet corner of the park. There, beneath a towering oak, he took a deep breath and allowed himself a rare moment of peace. In the distance, the city hummed with the vibrant energy of rebuilding, a stark contrast to the oppressive silence of the past. The trials, the gunfights, the endless nights of hiding, and the narrow escapes had all been steps on the long road to redemption. Vinny knew that scars, both visible and unseen, would remain, but he also understood that every scar told a story of survival, of the unyielding spirit that had refused to be crushed by injustice. In that serene moment, Vinny realized that his journey was complete. The chaos of his earlier life had given way to a future defined by accountability, community, and the enduring power of truth. The man who had once been forced to flee from his past was now a guardian of a city reborn. His story, interwoven with the struggles and triumphs of countless others, had reached its rightful conclusion, not in the blaze of unending conflict, but in the quiet determination to build a better tomorrow. The fall of Ferraro's empire was not just the end of an era of corruption. It was the birth of a new chapter for New Carthage. And though Vinny's path had been fraught with peril and loss, it had ultimately led him to a place of inner peace and redemption. As he left the park that day, the sun shining brightly overhead, Vinny carried with him the conviction that even the darkest pasts could give rise to a future bathed in hope and justice. The city, and he himself, had finally found the long-sought light at the end of the tunnel.